Welcome. Welcome, dear guests, to our high-level ministerial roundtable today on climate adaptation. The road beyond COP26 to COP27 and COP28. It is a real distinguished pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, who convened this meeting today, Your Excellency Minister Gewessler from Austria, Your Excellency Minister Al-Muhairi from the United Arab Emirates, and of course also we will hear from Minister Fouad from the Arab Republic of Egypt, and Your Excellency State Secretary Morgan from Germany. We are delighted to have all of you here today.
Thank you.
We are broadcasting live from the Impact Hub in Vienna, and thank everyone who are joining us virtually, but also those that are present in the room. My name is Monika Fröhler. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, and I am allowed to moderate today's high-level panel. We are gathering at a moment when we are facing increasing challenges due to the climate crisis. And it is important that we continue to tackle the crisis and ensure that it remains at the top of the agenda. What we are talking about today is adaptation. In a year where we have already seen record droughts in Eastern Africa, devastating floods right now in Pakistan and elsewhere, wildfires around the world, it becomes ever more important that we adapt to these climate challenges. So we live in times of turmoil, and the whole world is experiencing the full brunt of the climate crisis already. Therefore, today we will focus our discussion on the efforts that are being undertaken by UNFCCC, by the COP conferences, and we are privileged to have representatives from COP27 and COP28 with us today, and also, of course, of Austria and Germany, to see how progress is driven. In the run-up to Egypt, in a couple of days' time, I think it's 60, and furthermore in the run-up to COP28 in UAE, it is important not to lose track of what we need to do, and also to explore what already has been done. So I'm very much looking forward to exploring these topics with all of you, and I would like to give the floor first to you, dear Secretary General Ban, who has brought us together here for your opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency Minister Gewessler, it's a great pleasure to welcome you. Your Excellency Minister Al-Muhairi, Assalamu alaikum. And Your Excellency Minister Dr. Fouad, Bigetesinen, Dankeschön. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to meet all of you who are participating even online from all over the world. Thank you for your participation today. And I'm speaking from Vienna at the high-level ministerial roundtable on climate adaptation. The climate crisis is looming large in our lives and is amplified by events such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. Just weeks ago, to be more correct, on August 16, I was in Ukraine myself at the invitation of President Zelensky, and I have been very outspoken against the ruthless atrocities and killings by Russian military Ukrainian civilians that I witnessed. This must be condemned in the strongest possible terms, and there should be a justice process. All these people who are responsible must be brought to justice. We must do that for our moral conscience as we stand up for a type of society that we can all have faith in. Let us not forget, ladies and gentlemen, Africa relies on more than 80% of imported food the massive increases in global food prices are putting meals out of the reach of households across Africa, when more than a fifth of all Africans are already food insecure. Climate collapse has already begun. In East Africa, we see the most severe drought in more than 40 years. These events further escalate global energy and food insecurity, making it ever more urgent for us to deal effectively with the climate crisis. I commend the governments of Germany and Canada, who are co-leaders in the development of the progress report on the Climate Finance Delivery Plan, which seeks to ensure that these agreed finance targets are met. As we move towards the COP27 in Egypt and the COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, our efforts on adaptation must accelerate. Yesterday, in the Netherlands, I co-chaired the Africa Adaptation Summit meeting together with African leaders. It became clear that all the gains of COP26 in Glasgow, United Kingdom, are at risk if COP27 in Egypt does not succeed. We have to do all to make that Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 a great success. And the success in Sharm el-Sheikh also depends on whether Africa's needs are met. With everything we do, we need to put people in the center of our approaches, particularly the most vulnerable, including women and youth. We all celebrated the landmark Glasgow Climate Pact, which included the objective to double adaptation finance by 2025. This pledge is so important. It is critical to instill confidence in global cooperation in the lead-up to COP27, given how much growing climate disasters deepen global injustice. Because Africa is the world's most affected continent by climate change, Africa must absolutely accelerate adaptation like nowhere else. They have not contributed much, but they are the most affected people. We need, one, a standalone implementation plan on how to deliver on the target of doubling adaptation finance. This will also bring greater transparency on how we reach this objective. This doubling the adaptation fund was unanimously adopted and approved by African Union Summit meeting. And number two, we need Africa's plan for adaptation. The Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, or AAAP, to be fully resourced. In particular, the chairperson of the African Union, President Macky Sall of Senegal, said fellow African leaders yesterday called for a minimum mobilization of $250 million for the AAAP upstream financing facility as a COP27 deliverable. Such funds would guarantee the capacity to mobilize the full $25 billion ambition of the larger AAAP effort. Half of that money, $12.5 billion, have already been committed by the African Development Bank. That in turn would trigger a resilience revolution in Africa. And if Africa succeeds in this revolution, the world can be much, much better off. Indeed, an African COP is our chance to turn the tides on resilience for Africa and for the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me highlight at this point that helping people, especially the most vulnerable group of people, adapt to climate change will only bring positive economic effects. The Global Center on Adaptation estimates that investing $1.8 trillion in adaptation will save more than $7.1 trillion in climate costs in 10 years. This will not only help communities adapt to climate change, but also address poverty and public resilience in the most vulnerable communities. At the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, headquartered in Vienna, Austria, we are calling on the international community to increase their financial and political commitments for strengthening the adaptive capacity of communities in the Global South, especially for those who are on the front lines of the climate change, such as smallholder farmers. More funds are needed. We can and must do more. It is on world leaders, including all of us, here to help support this effort through political and financial means. I'm very much looking forward to our discussions today, dear Minister Gewessler and all the ministers, and to learn which steps we must take to adapt to climate change and push forward on climate action. Thank you, dear ministers and State Secretary, for joining this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, SG. Indeed, dear Leonore Gewessler, Your Excellency, you're the Federal Minister for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation, Technology of the Republic of Austria, a broad portfolio. Adaptation, COP27, COP28 are the buzzwords right now. Please do share your insights into the Austrian perspective on it.
Well, thanks a lot. First of all, I would really like to thank you, dear Excellency, dear Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, for convening this panel today, for bringing me together with the two great female leaders that join us from afar. That's a pleasure working with on advancing the issues that we discussed today. I would also like to thank you for your clear words on Russian invasion on Ukraine, because of course you mentioned my portfolio is also an energy portfolio. It's a topic that keeps much of my time at the moment, and I really want to commend and thank you for the clear words on also the aggression that we face on Europe, a war on European soil at the moment. Nonetheless, and especially I think in times like these, we need to emphasize and keep track and not lose out of sight the probably biggest challenge that we face on this planet in the century for humanity, and that's the climate crisis. And of course, the effects of the climate crisis that we already see now. I mean, we could say, and you mentioned it in your introduction, this summer was a wake-up call. Probably many of us in this room and many of us listening will question, why do we still need a wake-up call? Because for years we've seen how the climate crisis unfolds, how the effects of the temperature rise that we already observe, 1.2 degrees globally, 2 degrees in Austria, given our geographical circumstances, what kind of effects they have. And one of the most telling pictures for me this year was when Jennifer Morgan and I were at the Petersburg Climate Dialogue, and we were discussing how we can advance our mitigation and adaptation efforts. And our Spanish colleague had to leave the meeting because her country is burning, literally burning. And you mentioned Pakistan, you mentioned all the human suffering that we see. And so it's quite clear that adaptation, whether globally, and you put the focus on Africa, whether also domestically in Europe, in Austria, is a key issue to focus on. You mentioned also the numbers. Also, I can give you the numbers for Austria. Currently, damage from weather and climate change related events amounts to around 2 billion annually in damages that we have. By 2030, we expect this to rise to 3 to 6 billion. And by mid-century, we're talking about 6 to 12 billion euros annually for a country the size of Austria. There's countries that have an even bigger challenge. So we need to do everything in our possibility to mitigate these efforts. And it seems a bit maybe also even blunt to say this in this forum. It will be by the state of affairs that all of us brought this planet into, it will be unavoidable that some of these costs will be borne by future generations, because some of the effects we cannot take back. But it's our duty here and now to make sure that we are still, as long as we're still in a position to make this worse, to avert the most damaging effects, we do everything we can to do this. So I'm very well aware we are sitting in a discussion on adaptation, but I think we really also need to keep mitigation in the view, as a view of making sure we can still adapt. If we lose mitigation out of sight, we will not be able to adapt to a world that's no longer livable. So that is why I think that's really one of my topics for these debates. We need to see these two efforts as part of the same coin, making sure that future generations still have a life on this planet and a good life on this planet. So in terms of course, we do a lot nationally in terms of adaptation measures. We have a long history in dealing with extreme weather events and their effects in Austria. But on the global scale, we just to give you one more, or to give you what are we doing on a global scale, of course, one point is that we wanted to really also show that we take, I put it like this now, show that we take the topic seriously by also submitting our adaptation communication quite early on in the process to make sure it's so even ahead of the COP26 in Glasgow to show this is an important issue. We take it seriously. We hear the calls. We see the issues. And there's a lot of detailed information on what we do nationally also in this regard, and maybe there's some time later to give you some of the examples. But I think it's quite clear, and you made a very clear call also in your introductory remarks on that we need to step up efforts in the upcoming COPs that we and we committed to that. So we also need to find a way to take our own words seriously, to take the process seriously that will lead us to reaching the goal. But I think, yeah. We have so much work to do. Let's not try to block each other from, or to pitch the different issues against each other. We will only succeed if we tackle mitigation and adaptation together. Maybe I'll leave it at this for the first intro.
Thank you. You gave me a great segue, because indeed mitigation and adaptation are two sides of the same coin. And it will be up, or a big onus is put on Egypt hosting COP27. And I'm delighted that we have the Minister statement with us, with a video statement by Her Excellency Yasmin Fouad of the Arab Republic of Egypt. She's the Minister of Environment. She cannot be with us today, but she has given us the video statement. And I'm glad if the technicians are playing the video statement for us before I give the floor to our distinguished other speakers.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished participants. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Ban Ki-moon for hosting this high-level event on adaptation. And I would like to greet other ministers attending from around the world. This event comes in a timely manner to shed light on a very important issue of adaptation, where we need all to take action and, in fact, accelerate that action. Secondly, I assure you that Egypt is working hard to deliver an outcome from COP27 and to build upon the success that came from Glasgow in COP26 and enhance and pass that over to COP28, especially in the issue related to adaptation. As COP27 is a COP for implementation, there will be a number of global initiatives that will be announced during the COP that would vary and serve adaptation purpose, such as an initiative that focuses on food security in the agriculture sector, the FAST, and another one on the water and the early warning system and water scarcity, that's the AWARE, as well as another initiative that builds upon the ecosystem services and protection of our marine life as in relation to the biodiversity. In addition to a number of thematic days that we felt would be very important to shed light on adaptation efforts from around the world, such as the Agriculture and Adaptation Day, the Water Day, the Biodiversity Day, and other cross-cutting issues that are of a great importance to the African continent, as well as to other countries around the world. Those would include the youth, the civil society, the gender, as well as the finance. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very important as we are now 60 days towards COP27 to call upon action where all of us would be able to stand up and gather all our efforts in order to adapt to the impact of climate change. Climate crisis is getting to every single inch around the world without differentiating between developing and developed countries. And now it is the moment to stand up and keep progress on the global goal on adaptation, show the success stories that can protect and keep our local communities resilient. Those stories are not in vain, but rather stories that could be replicated and upscaled so that we can stand up for the future generation and say, although 2022 was full of challenges, we were up to that challenge and we were able to face and encounter that fight against climate change, hoping that the environmental multilateralism would prove its credibility and success on the road to COP27 and beyond, towards a more adaptive community and a resilient world for us all and for our future generation. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard a lot is at stake at COP27 that considers itself to be an implementation COP. Similarly, COP28 will have to take the torch even further. So it's a real honor to welcome Her Excellency Minister Al-Muhairi. She's Minister of Climate Change and Environment for the United Arab Emirates. Thinking ahead of COP28 and your presidency then, can you share your perspective with us?
Thank you, Monica. Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon, thank you so much for making this event happen. Such an important to get ourselves together, get ourselves aligned again. So really, I thank you for that. And it's so great to be here amongst my fellow ministers, and they're all female ministers, which are great to see. So thank you for that. And really, it's a pleasure to address you from the United Arab Emirates. I extend my sincere appreciation to the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens for organizing this important event. Yes, Monica, you named it, and a lot of you have already mentioned it, the floods in Pakistan, the severe droughts and heat waves across Europe, and even in the UAE this summer, we had severe flooding And unfortunately, this also led to many casualties as well. So we're feeling it everywhere around the world. And as you said, Your Excellency, Leonor, we don't actually need a wake-up call. It's here and now. And so, yeah, COP27 and COP28 coming ahead of us will be so important and critical to make sure that everyone's still thinking climate urgency. And we need to think of, as many of my colleagues already said, science-based adaptation measures. That should be key and center to protect those in vulnerable developing countries. And there is really a strong moral and economic case for the global goal on adaptation. So it should be a worldwide and all-inclusive target that follows a bottom-up approach. As Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon, you mentioned that the voices of NGOs, youth, and those most impacted are included in decisions that directly affect their lives and livelihoods. So we must empower these segments and communities to lead sustainable and effective adaptation measures to climate change at the local level. Again, this was mentioned by some of my colleague ministers. We need to ensure delivery on initiatives that have been launched to support adaptation, such as the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Programme. These will be key in accelerating the achievement of the global goal on adaptation and should inform the first global stocktake, which will be at the COP28 in the UAE next year. In the time that remains till COP28, we urge all nations to really step up and enhance their adaptive capacities. I was in Bali in Indonesia at the G20 track for environment and climate. Unfortunately, a consensus was not achieved at that time point, and this is, of course, it's disheartening, it's disappointing, all the more that we have to work even harder because, as you all know, usually the G20 was our momentum builder towards the COP. And so we have to work even harder now and ensure that COP27 is a success. The UAE has prioritized climate security during its term of the UN Security Council. We advocated for scaling up investments to tackle climate change-related challenges to global food and water systems and to cope with natural disasters in vulnerable countries. A priority for us is enhancing the adaptive capacity of the agricultural sector, one of the highest contributors to and most affected by climate change. So we joined forces, as you know, with the United States of America, to launch the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, AIM4C. And the aim of that is really to transform the agriculture and food systems to withstand the inevitable impacts of climate change. And that is ongoing. And at COP27, we want to sort of also demonstrate how this initiative is going, how smallholder farmers are being included in this, and give updates to the commitments of the nearly over 200 partners we have on board now. Also to help vulnerable communities become climate resilient, making climate finance available and accessible is instrumental, with adaptation efforts taking up a bigger share today. As a climate vulnerable country, the UAE is taking concrete measures to climate-proof its key sectors, including the energy sector, infrastructure, health, and the environment as part of our national climate change adaptation program. We are prioritizing also nature-based solutions, and we have pledged to plant an additional 100 million mangroves by 2030. Not easy, considering the available space, but we understand how important the nature-based solutions are and how important mangroves are as a solution. So following, of course, the outcomes of COP26 and COP27, we will, of course, re-engage, or countries need to re-engage, particularly on the adaptation front, to drive a just, inclusive, and meaningful action. We, the UAE, are committed also to supporting the Egyptian presidency and seeking tangible and adaptation outcomes at COP27. As you mentioned, Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon, it is so important that COP27 is a successful African COP. Also, you know, we look forward to convening again next year, all here in the UAE, for a successful Asian COP as well. And as my colleague Leonard said, there's lots to be done. And so I'm really looking forward to the discussions we have here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Yeah, we have Jennifer Morgan with us, and you already spoke, dear Minister Al-Muhairi, about the financial implications that are built within the adaptation and the mitigation portfolio. And Jennifer Morgan, as the State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action at Germany's Federal Foreign Office, has a specific role there, because Germany and Canada are leading on the progress report on climate finance and the delivery plan. So, Jennifer Morgan, please share your insights on particularly that topic.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much, Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon. It's such a privilege to be here with you, and to I remember your commitment when you were serving as Secretary General, and it's very inspiring, and very keen to be working with you in all of that you're doing right now. And ministers, it's just great to share this panel with you. I think I won't repeat kind of what's been said about the situation we're in right now. I think we all know that the Paris Agreement had a number of different pillars and long-term goals. And while I agree, obviously, that the mitigation goal and the gap that we have right now is far too large and needs to be closed, and we need to keep the 1.5 degree goal in sight. I think the focus on adaptation and on finance, also not to mention loss and damage as well, but are just essential. That was the joint partnership that we made in Paris. So, and I think, the gap we know is large. And maybe just to say one thing is, Germany remains very, very committed and are working very hard to accelerate our pathway to 1.5, achieving our goals, the coal phase out and climate neutrality by 2045. There is, due to the horrific Russian war of aggression, a short-term question, which is around needing to make sure we have enough reserves for the winter. But I want to assure you and your viewers that we remain committed to the energy transformation and to our climate goals. In regards to the financial question, which you asked, maybe a little bit just quickly on Germany, and then where we're looking to go with Minister Guilbeault on this progress report. I think, Germany is trying to play our part. In 2020, we provided 2.6 billion euros from budgetary resources and grant equivalents for adaptation activities. And it's about 45% of the budgetary resources for international climate finance, and strong role to play, obviously, for grant financing for adaptation. We know that, how essential that is, but we also know we need to tap into private sources better to build up resilient societies and to ensure that the investments we need are there around the globe. And so we're working also to send strong policy signals. I think that we all need to be looking at that to the private and to the banking sector, and also obviously looking at, if they were to incorporate the risks and the costs of climate change into their assessments and decisions, how that would also help shift the investments that are needed. But we're fully aware of the urgent financial needs that the most vulnerable countries, Africa, obviously front and center with an Egyptian COP, and the communities. I think that's so key, because we know how effective adaptation strategies and finance strategies need to reach the ground and be informed by the ground. And in the midst of the financial strain of COVID, just what those needs are. But we're also very clear that the adaptation finance right now internationally falls short of what's necessary. So we have to step up our efforts individually and collectively. And I think also in the access to finance, this is another very important issue that we know is not being adequately addressed, that countries can't, it takes forever for grants to go through. They can't access the finance that they need while we get that balance between mitigation and adaptation. So one of the initiatives that we're currently engaged in, which we find very interesting and inspiring with other like-minded countries, is the Champions Group on Adaptation Finance. where we're really seeking innovative ways to ramp up our efforts to collectively increase our share of adaptation finance. And we're now moving, as we move to COP27, we're encouraging other donors to follow suit in increasing their ambition as well. As an anchor country with Rwanda in the task force on access to finance, we're fully committed to continuing to show concrete action on how to improve access to climate financing for our partner by methodically applying the task force principles and recommendations. And I think we'll get a lot of good insights on that of actually how to solve some of those problems. And we're also working very hard and listening carefully to inform a long-term vision and initiative that we, with partners, have put forward on a global shield against climate risks, which is an initiative that aims at a more systemic, coherent, and sustained financial protection for poor and vulnerable people and countries. And as you mentioned, the progress report on the 100 billion is now in the works. We've been consulting with major groups, Minister Guilbeault and I, to see, okay, where are we on this? I think we know where the OECD numbers are. We know right now that there is still a gap, but digging into those initiatives that are there on adaptation finance, on access, on the role of the private sector, on MDBs to see what more can be done there. And I think obviously it's absolutely urgent. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Morgan. We will go back to the theme of finance, but I do want to break into the discussion now and really tackle a couple of topics with all of you. And I encourage you, if you have questions for your colleagues, please don't shy away to ask them, because this shall be interactive, not only me asking the questions. We are looking at the global goal of adaptation. We want to have a global goal on adaptation. It is manifested in Article 7 of the Paris Agreement, and it aims, as we all know, to enhance the adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change, including the status of financial flows that shall increase. Now, however, we are still in discussion on the global goal on adaptation and how we can measure it, how we can best actually make use of it. And it's been very complex. It's been slow to see how we can put it into practice. So at COP26, the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program that was mentioned a couple of times was launched to foster the progress in defining this global goal on adaptation. Now, my question to all of you would be, from your country's perspective, what would you define as a priority for this global adaptation agenda, and why? So is there someone who wants to volunteer on this quite difficult one, probably, a nut to crack for COP27 and beyond?
Maybe let me speak to you. Our expectations is much, much higher on the Sharm el-Sheikh 27 COP because there was a heightened expectations on Glasgow COP26. Of course, they made a good progress in ending the deforestation or methane agreement and some other issues. And they also made quite clear that carbon neutrality by 2050. But there are the other side of some disappointment that it was not wholehearted success in a sense that the languages have been some diluted. For example, when we expected that by 2050 there should be a carbon neutrality by whole world's people. But more than 140 or nearly 150 countries expressed their firm commitment for carbon neutrality by 2050. But in the course of the negotiation, we hope that by the end of 2050, the zero, there is a net to zero. Then this language has been diluted because of some oppositions from some certain countries. China has announced the carbon neutrality 2060, and India has announced the carbon neutrality 2070. And therefore, what has happened is that instead of phasing out the coal fossil fuels by end of 2050, then it was agreed like this way, by and around the middle of the century. So it has been weakened one. That's one thing. And about a couple of weeks ago, I visited, together with former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd. Two of us visited in India to urge Indian government to have some stronger ambition, raise their political ambition level. I think by 2070, that's too far away. Now we are talking about almost another 50 years from 2022. So that is one thing. Chinese seems to be quite firm that they will finish carbon neutrality by 2060. I think on this matter, being China is number one emitting countries in the world, and they committed that by 2050 they will build 150 nuclear power stations. So this is a huge commitment, 150. 150 nuclear power station means that this is more than 1/3 of current global number of nuclear power stations. There are 439 nuclear power stations all throughout the world. So 150 is more than 1/3. So I think that there is a more or less understanding that China, because of sheer size of gross emissions, so by 2060, that is now understandable. But I hope that India could raise at least by 2060 or whatever. I know India is also very serious problem, challenges, the sheer size of population and level of poverty, and all this, and this population is increasing faster, much faster than other countries. So my suggestion is that while carbon neutrality by 2030 at 2050 is a very challenging one, but even with that, then we may not be able to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius a pathway. For example, Africans, they may end up, instead of 1.5 degrees, 3 degrees. That means all African people may die because of this heat waves. So then I think when it comes to this issue, there is no difference between countries, between regions.
Yeah.
We are all in this together.
Yeah.
We will all live or we will all die. This is one thing which I have been emphasizing, yes.
SG, let me pick that one up, because the chairperson of the African Union, Mackay Sall, he said, we have to adapt or we die. He was as blunt as this yesterday. Right. And that's probably really the call. We have to raise our ambition level. Now my question is, what should we prioritize doing that on adaptation?
I know we're all looking for silver bullet answers, and there is always a difficulty in finding silver bullet answers because normally they don't exist. But I understand, and I think Jennifer alluded to it also in the beginning, that while we need and absolutely need to keep the focus on mitigation, because if we don't mitigate, we'll die sooner. Sorry to put it as blunt as this now in advancing the argument. We need to be honest that the other pillars of the debate, of the international debate, need the attention that they deserve, and adaptation is one of them. And if we discuss so what's needed, then much of actually we know what's needed in many cases. We need to implement. So a COP of implementation is actually what's needed most. And for implementation, I have the feeling much of it is about getting hurdles out of the way that prevent implementation. And so, of course, adaptation is a complex and cross-cutting issue, needs a lot of stakeholders on board. It will not it will not be easy answers in many cases. But of course, we need to tackle that. So we gave each other in Glasgow 2 years to actually take that seriously, discuss it seriously, get the clarity and a common picture on what is needed most. So I think let's take that process seriously. The second thing is, of course, finance. We'll come back to that. Of course, that's a restraint that we all face and that the world faces. But I think also from our I'd like to focus on something also very pragmatic and maybe down to earth and maybe more doable. That's sometimes it's also a matter of data availability. We also see that in our national efforts on adaptation, that this can be a real bottleneck, especially for local and non-state actors. So, for example, to address this in Austria, we've established a nationwide risk zoning system for natural hazards. So to really have a quite low-key level of information on where are you at a higher risk of flooding or natural disasters or mudslides, supporting awareness raising and supporting to limit the damage potential and data availability. That's a little example from Austria, but I think that's also something that that is a topic at the global level as well. So I think we need to identify the proper solutions, but it's really about implementation. And so I think this is what will be measured on, not the next paper, will be measured on making what we already put on paper reality.
Yeah, and putting into the reality the 100 billion is another big call that is up for COP27. And we are right now, the OECD says we are at 83.3 only, and they have measured the financial flows, and it's definitely falling short of the promise. And therefore, I want to go back to Jennifer Morgan and ask you, finances are at the crux of the matter. How can we encourage more countries to step up to the game? What can we do?
Well, I think if you look at how to achieve the 100 billion, and we developed countries committed to do that by 2023 last year. I think the OECD numbers are, it's encouraging and non-encouraging. Obviously, at the same time, it's very bad news because the number is not 100 billion, but there was an increase despite COVID, which was good. But let me dive into your question more directly. I think one of the key questions is the role of international financial institutions. And there, I think that the shareholders of the World Bank, working with partner countries, need to really take a look at how their support for adaptation, but their support for alignment with the Paris Agreement, is going to move forward in a much greater way. I think institutions also like the IFC are working to develop approaches with the private sector on mitigation, but I mean, adaptation, it's obviously not as central, but still needed there. And I think obviously we need also to be looking at our public funds. But I think one of the key pieces there is how to unlock that finance. And I think there it's linked in with the discussion. I don't want to make a direct link, but the clarity of the signals that are put forward on the policies that are needed and the approaches that are needed on the ground are the things that are going to be able to help attract the finance in the private sector to make make things happen. And so there, the question, your last question, is quite important, because I think one of the challenges with the global goal on adaptation is that adaptation is very local. We know we need local engagement. We know we need community engagement. We know, and yet we're in a negotiation on the national level. And we also know that there are global issues that are transnational, like food security, which is a huge issue right now. So I think figuring out how to bring both of those components into the global goal on adaptation is key. But then looking at, each country, as we are looking at our own finances, but really challenging and the international financial solutions to really rethink how they're doing their work to step up more on adaptation, but then also on mitigation. And I think that's definitely part of the question. I think also, the question of how to track all of this, and transparency and accountability is a key question as well. But those enabling kind of conditions connected in with finance, I think are key. And I am going to listen for a little bit longer, but unfortunately I have to leave a little bit early. So when I disappear, I just want to say first, thank you for my chance to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jennifer Morgan, for being here. State Secretary, honored to have you. Minister Al-Muhairi, we just heard food security. We just heard also about the water dimension. And I know that it needs local engagement. All of us know that. You have been key for the UAE to represent the UAE in food and water contexts all across the globe. You served at the FAO. You also launched the Aim4C. So what's your vision, particularly when it comes to the food dimension, to the agricultural dimension, on adaptation, on a local level, but maybe also extrapolate on the global one?
Okay, I'll come to answer that after I just give also some comments on what's really important right now. We need leadership. We need leadership. Countries need to lead. We need to step up our ambitions. Here in the UAE, we're now working on our updated NDCs, because we really want to kind of be a trendsetter as well for the region, to say there are new technologies out there, there's new know-how, we can do better than what we submitted a few years ago. So we're taking that track, and this is also part of the Glasgow Pact as well. Next thing is the net zero strategic initiatives. We were also the first in the region to announce a net zero by 2050 strategic initiative. We are working hard now to look at the actual journey we're going to take to net zero. I think it's really important to have these conversations in the country, where we have launched something called the National Dialogue for Climate Action. So every month we look at a particular sector, whether it's the industry, whether it's the power sector, whether it's the waste sector, and we're having these dialogues with the private sector to make sure that they're also engaged with us. They're telling us what are the bottlenecks that they're facing, how can they do better to also reach the net zero target, because this is a country effort, and it's a nation effort, and we got to get all the stakeholders engaged. So I can only say from my own experience so far, engaging with your stakeholders on a regular basis is so key. Through COVID, I think a lot of these engagements kind of stopped. Having these face-to-face engagements again is so important. We just launched a pledge. So the private companies have now pledged to commit to net zero. They've also pledged to be transparent in their greenhouse gas emissions, and also to share. This is all part of how we will report as a country as well. And it was so interesting, because all of them are like, okay, tell us how, or we can see that these policies are hindering us. So we've had great discussions, and I can only tell others, have those national dialogues, because it's key to moving things forward. You need to put up the bar. You need to have the political will to lead, and this is why I was also saying, part of the G20 discussions that we saw. We need the countries to lead on this front. Now, going back to what you mentioned about food security, yes, as we all know, food systems contribute to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, food systems should be just as important as the energy security conversation that we're having right now, and that we will always be talking about these subjects. They always have this interconnection with climate, and it's so important that why Aim for C came to our minds, why we wanted to push this was we needed to accelerate the efforts in changing food systems and making food systems more sustainable, and ensuring there was a vehicle or a platform that countries could tap into, share knowledge, that we could help developing countries. So far, there's over $4 billion of commitments from country partners and non-state partners into this initiative. And we hope at COP27 we'll be announcing more, and also showcasing that this is not just about novelty foods or high-tech solutions. This is also about, there are also tracks in there for smallholder farmers. And it's really important to demonstrate, hopefully at COP27, success stories. I think we need to instill hope in the people and say it does work, this and this has worked, or this farmer has had access to this finance or this this organization to get the finance needed. I think we need to put a lot more work on hope, and showcase great examples. And yeah, again, I can only say it's so key that we have leadership here. This journey to net zero, even we're looking into so many different pathways. It's not going to be easy, even for a country that we have the resources. We're able to move the pin, and I'm so thankful that the UAE is really leader in this. We're so committed. Our leadership are committed since many years on this front. We've already started diversifying our energy sources from at least 15 years ago. We were the first in the region to sign and ratify the Paris Agreement. So we have that leadership, which is great. But even we are on the forefront of this. Even I can see that it's going to be a challenge. So those countries who are not there yet at that level, it's going to be an even bigger jump. And that's why it's so important that we help out. And then the UAE is also investing a lot in developing countries. We developed a platform with the IRENA to kind of have a funding for developing countries, mainly in Africa as well, to be able to transition and use renewable energy sources. So we're also doing a lot on the forefront globally to try and get the energy systems, food systems ongoing, because this is all of our business here. It should be everyone's business.
Very true. It has been SG Bahn's business ever since the Paris Climate Agreement and even before. So I would like to hand back to you, SG Bahn. We need success stories. We need multi-stakeholder partnerships. We need big transformations of the food system and the energy security system. What would you see as the utmost importance right now coming from the African Adaptation Summit? You have heard the pleas from the African continent. How would you voice what is necessary to do now?
There were several African leaders at the head of state level, like a president of Senegal, who is also at the same time president of the African Union at the time, then the presidents of Ghana and also Democratic People's Republic, DRC, and the chairperson of the African Union, Moussa Faki. So there were all African leadership represented. If we look at the statistics, there are 54 countries in Africa, but the total gross emission is just 3% of global emission. So they are the least contributing to this current climate phenomena situation. But at the same time, 54 countries are the worst and most affected by climate phenomena at this time. Therefore, there is some serious injustice, unfairness on this matter. That is why we are really trying to help African countries to adapt. Most affected area is agriculture. That's a basic in our human lives. They import, all these 54 countries, 80% of their food are all imported for them. That is a huge. Then per capita income-wise, 75% of their income are spent on purchasing food. So they cannot enjoy any other cultural or any other areas for their daily living. Therefore, that is why we really wanted to redouble our support for African countries. Of course, there is an agreement by the African Union and by international community that we will really fully support. But at this time, because of geopolitical issues, natural disaster issues, the priority sometimes is now being given some other ways. Wars, like the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine has also attracted much more political attention on Ukraine, how to support Ukrainian people. Some big countries are now slashing their climate earmarked fund to support Ukrainian people. Of course, the Ukrainian government and people, they deserve their urgent support. But that does not mean that they have to cut all this fund from earmarked for climate adaptation, climate mitigation. That is quite a short-sighted way. Therefore, we have to have, first of all, longer-term vision. And what is most urgently needed is to stop this rapidly approaching climate change. We have to really put all our resources and raise the political ambition as high as possible. That's what I have been urging since my days as Secretary General. Now, even my life as a retired Secretary General, I'm spending most of my time in urging world leaders to raise their ambition level in addressing this one. That adaptation is the most important area. It may sound very difficult, but it's not that difficult if there's a political will. And even from our daily livings, we can really make a lot of differences. For example, when it comes to Africa and smallholder farmers, they are the most affected one. If we choose climate resilient seed, then we can expect much more, harvest, much more harvest. Then how to make sure that we have water available for many people. In the Sahel area, most of the people are suffering from lack of water because of climate change phenomena. Then when it comes to South Pacific small island countries, Caribbean countries, even planting mangrove will really help their economy and their survival even. Because of rising sea levels, all these coastlines are now being washed away. That means this is a matter of survival. So planting mangroves along the seashores can protect them, protect this washing away the sand. Or these are some small things. Then investing in climate-friendly infrastructures. when you build roads or housings or other factories, we have to think how these infrastructures would be more effectively or efficiently protect us from rapidly approaching a climate phenomenon. So therefore, we have to use all our resources and political will. We don't need to do all the big issues. Small ideas can really help.
Yeah.
Those are something which we have to learn from our life. Yeah.
Yeah. Nature-based solutions, you were talking a lot about them. You were talking also about protecting biodiversity to a certain extent and adapting infrastructure. Austria is doing a lot in this regard. And maybe, Minister, you can elaborate a bit more on how could Austria be a beacon of hope? We heard about hope for other countries, maybe even EU countries, to inspire and to be a beacon of hope.
That is, I couldn't agree more on saying we need political leadership in many aspects, be it in mitigation, be it in adaptation. And we are in Austria really doing now our utmost best. I'm working in this position now as a minister for 2.5 years to step by step, measure after measure, law after law, doing policies that get down emissions, in investments that get down emissions, investments in adaptation, investments in protecting people, because I think you put it very clear. That's what adaptation is about: is protecting livelihoods of people. But I'm not claiming all is well, and I'm not claiming that Austria is top of the class on everything. We have a catch-up race to do. But I think what we can maybe show also as a small country, what we can show, and I think that's also a responsibility for Europe, is that we take our commitments seriously, both in mitigation and in adaptation, and we work step by step on really getting them on the ground. And I think that's something that we need to be able to prove to also, and that's also part of taking the injustice of the global injustice of climate crisis seriously. Means we need to lead in this, and we need to take that seriously, the countries who have the ability to do so. And that means Austria also will have to do more. And I agree. Yeah, it's the road to net zero, to climate neutrality. Austria has pledged to do so until 2040. That's a big task. That's a real challenge. But the good thing is we have the solutions. We know what to, as I said before, we know what to do. It's about implementation. And if I see today, we finalized the law last year for 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We will have a record year of renewable investments this year. We are on track to reach the goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2030. And how people are engaged in this and how we manage to make people part of this energy transition, then I think that's an example we can share. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot we can learn from other examples from other countries on how we on how to advance. But I really think we need a lot of projects of implementation and successful implementation to give the hope that it's doable. But if you allow, I'd like to pick up on one argument that we had earlier, and it takes me a bit back to the finance question. But I think I want to underline something that Jennifer said. Again, also here, Austria has doubled its public climate finance since 2013. More than half of our bilateral grant agreements are on adaptation. Mm-hmm. Yeah? We work very locally with the communities, big focus on adapting to what's needed on the ground, on measures like you, Secretary General, just described, in bringing, on really listening to the people, what's needed very locally. Empowering women is one of our key focus areas in these projects. But we'll also see we need to step up in public finance, but state budgets will not be able to do it alone, and that's the point I wanted to underline from what Jennifer said. I think in this whole debate on finance, I think it's really important we broaden our horizon and our view. I don't say that with the view of saying we're not responsible to step up our own efforts, not at all. But whether it's in mitigation, whether it's in adaptation, if we don't manage to align private finance to the goal, the public finance will not be able to step up completely. Of course, public finance is strained by the effects of the pandemic. It's strained by the effects of Russia using, in our case, Russia using energy as a weapon in Europe. But it's simply the magnitude of the task needs all hands on board and needs all hands on deck, and that we need to also really in the next COPs work on, in my opinion, work on Article 2.1c on aligning financial flows in the private sector, in the multilateral institutions. I have a lot of conversation with the financial sector. They all tell me the money is there. Okay, so then we need to move it to where it's actually needed to protect lives, to protect our livelihoods. And I think another question that we need to address in this aspect, and I think it was Franz Timmermans who also addressed it at the summit yesterday. World has changed. Yeah, there is a historical responsibility that I fully see, but the world has also changed, and we cannot talk about these tasks without also having the commitment of the major emitters, without having the commitment, you mentioned China, also on the adaptation, also on the solution, also on the cooperation side. And I think we need to find a way to address this issue more clearly, because it's one of the elephants in the room.
Absolutely true. I know, Mr. Minister Al-Muhairi, you wanted to enter the discussion already at a previous point. So can I pass the floor just to you to react?
Sure. I can only align with what my colleague Leonora actually mentioned. I think it's so great to see a country like Austria also have these great targets, and they're well on track. And we need these examples, these models for other countries to see. Yes, it is doable. It is doable. It's possible. The solutions are there. We need to ensure, of course, all the modules of access of finance. But of course, it's never so, it's not just so simple as when you have the funding and you have the technology, then you also need the human capacity to be able to actually use the technology. And you need to also be able to connect everything together. That's another investment in itself. So it's why this is so complicated is because every country, I feel, is at a different level. Political wills are also at different levels, but we're all sharing one planet, right? So it's really important that we have great examples like Austria actually showcasing it is doable, and we can live our lives the way we want to live our lives in this way as well. And the UAE also, we've got our ambitions, our targets as well for renewables, which are also on track. We started investing in renewables already more than 15 years ago. And today we are operating 3 of the largest solar parks in the world. We've invested a lot on the hydrogen front, green hydrogen as well. There's a lot happening on that because we have also set targets by 2030, 2040, 2050 on diversifying our energy mix, but also decarbonizing our oil and gas sector as well. So as of 1st of January this year, our national oil company is actually running completely on clean and renewable energy. This is, again, a commitment and to showcase that we are taking this seriously, that we're taking a kind of two-pronged approach, ramping up our renewables while decarbonizing our oil and gas sector, and also moving away from it as well. So it's really important that countries have these plans, these pathways, and that we share with each other lessons learned and share the technology as well. I think it's our duty to do so.
Yeah, tying in technology, tying in the private sector. Minister Gewessler, you spoke about private sector has a crucial role to play, and it's not only public funding, it's private funding as well. My question to all of you would be, do you know of specific success stories where this was possible and where private sector was really stepping up majorly? How can we do more of that? Can you share success stories? Yeah.
In fact, private sectors are now getting all these good policies from the government. But I think most of the money, technologies are run by business, private sectors, not the government. It's important that I've been always emphasizing this tripartite partnership among government, business, and civil society. They should have a strong, tripartite partnership. Without that, nothing can be done. Nothing can be done. This is number one, a very important principle. Then government should really make sure that make all necessary regulations so that business communities can freely and easily, can operate their businesses. But according to, depending upon which country we are talking about, some countries are taking very strict legislative or legal restrictions, so that sometimes business are now taking it very hard to operate. That's one thing which we need to do. So I've been really hoping that this kind of partnership will be further strengthened. In fact, number 17 goal of sustainable development, that's a partnership. I've been always saying that there is not a single country in this world, however powerful, however resourceful one country may be. For example, we think that United States is the most powerful, most resourceful and rich country, but they cannot do it alone. Without support and cooperating with other countries, without working together with the business. And civil society can also play very important role. Now, I'm also encouraged to see increasing voice of the civil society. Independent voices should always be given to government and business community. In that regard, there is a good tendency that ESG, environment, social, and governance, is now being has become a very much important element in doing all global issues. That is what I'm very much hopeful that we can make it happen, particularly when it comes to adaptation. Then we should do much more. Yeah.
We need to do more on adaptation.
It's a recurring issue of the debate.
It is.
I can pick up where Your Excellency left off. I'm convinced we need to do this together. And for this, we need people, and lots of people take decisions every day. It's not just politicians taking decisions. It's every boss in every company who take decisions where money goes, where their how they make their employees come to work, which kind of mobility. It's 100 decisions every day. We need people in all of these spots to take the right decisions. So that's clear. We need the investments to help that. We need the technology to help that. We need the people to actually do the job. So there's a lot of things we need to do. But and of course, and I said earlier that I'm a lot in touch with the financial sector, yes. And it's really often some of the most encouraging meetings that I have, because of course, if a bank asks one major emitting company I will only finance your investment if you tell me how you're going to decarbonize, because otherwise I have a climate risk and a stranded investment. This is a very powerful lever. Mm-hmm. But I think, but I'm here as a politician, and I think we have a responsibility in the mandates that we took on, and that's to make sure that the climate action, whether in mitigation or in adaptation, doesn't only depend on goodwill of people who are in a decision-making spot. And we need a lot of people with the goodwill and the engagement and the heart and the fighting. It doesn't sound like retirement, dear Secretary General, what you are doing at the moment. So it's really, we need a lot of these people, but we also need the legal and the laws that make sure this doesn't go away anymore and this doesn't change anymore. And so we're now, we already managed a law on 100% renewable electricity. We're now working on a law on decarbonizing the heating sector, so to get out all the oil heatings, to have a deadline on how long gas heating cannot be operated only until 2040, and they have to be renewable and exchanged. We're working on a strategy to decarbonize our industry sector. We have a strategy for the mobility. We work on this also in the European level with the Fit for 55 package. Mm-hmm. We need the certainty that the commitments we take do not go away anymore, and any investment decision that is based on this commitment is the right one. And that's why I think the climate law that we voted at the European level last year is a key milestone in this, because this gives the frame and the security for all those who still have the feeling they are courageous if they do climate action, that they are on track, that they are doing the right thing, because this is going to be the new normal. And if you're upfront now, you will be better off later. And I think for this, we need the private sector on board. I think it's really key that as politicians, we take also the responsibility in shaping the debate, in making sure the legal framework is right. And that's a fight for every millimeter. I think all of us who are in the business know that, but that's our job to do.
I want to give the floor once more to Minister Al-Muhairi for your probably concluding thoughts of this debate and, and COP28. What are you taking away?
Yeah. Okay, I want to also join in, Monica. You asked about concrete examples of private sector before I come to COP28. Mm-hmm. Something I really remember, this is the Prosperity Project. This is a landmark project, part of the, as you know, we're soon going to be celebrating the 2-year Abraham Accords. Mm-hmm. And the UAE facilitated a landmark project between Israel, Jordan, and the UAE, with the private sector involved in ensuring that in Jordan, a solar park was built to provide Israel with renewable energy, and in Israel, a desalination plant being built to provide water to Jordan, making sure energy security and water security was taken in. This was government and private sector partnership, technology transfer, funding. For me, this was one of, because you asked me for a concrete project, and I think this is a beautiful project of multilateralism, bringing private sector and public partnerships, and really building bridges between countries and sharing knowledge. So this is a concrete example that I would like to share. And I was honored that I was part of signing this project with Israel and Jordan. And
I'm afraid we have just now.
Special Presidential Envoy John Kerry was also there. Sorry, I was probably off for a second.
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to share that with you, and that we're really looking forward to the weeks coming ahead. And as His Excellency said, it's so important that COP27 is a success, and we're supporting in every way we can. And then as well, the global stocktake happening next year for the first time will be an eye-opener. And that's why all the more it's important that we have solutions at hand, because I think what we're going to see is not very good. And therefore, it's important that we have answers and pathways ready for what we're going to see. Thank you.
Totally.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. And with this, I would like to hand over to SG Bahn. We have heard about adaptation, we have heard about finance, we have heard about pathways, partnerships, but also really stepping up the ambition. So SG Bahn, please do give us your concluding remarks of this discussion today.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have participated in this with the very distinguished ministers of very responsible countries. Now, I really appreciate your contribution to these discussions we just had today. It's great to hear how the 4 countries of Austria, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt and Germany are contributing to climate adaptation at home and abroad. Nonetheless, we need to keep up the intensity of our efforts and cannot afford to take our eyes off this ball. And this is very important. I'm urging the political leaders, first of all, to raise their ambition level. And I think we are all aware that demonstrating clear results in delivering the doubling in adaptation finance at COP27, especially for Africa, and that will be essential for success. I think we are going toward the right direction, but we need to be able to do much more. I think much more can be done, in fact, if political leaders can raise their ambition level. Now, as a global community, we must promote all efforts to enhancing adaptation action and implementation, especially in the global south. The upcoming COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh is now receiving highest expectation because we believe that the COP26 in Glasgow was regarded as a half, meeting the half. Then we hope that there's a Sharm el-Sheikh will be a great success. And I'm also urging the Asian countries. If you look at all statistics, among 10 most greenhouse gas emitting countries, 7 countries are belonging to Asia. If I apply the geographical distribution in accordance to United Nations, like just the proper Asia itself, 5 countries: China, India, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, 5 countries. These are the countries in the main Asia. Then if we apply this UN standard of distribution of area, we can add like Iran and Saudi Arabia. That means 7 countries are in Asia. Then I think Asia should do much more. I'm coming from Asia. Now, that's why Kevin Rudd and I are working under the title, theme of getting Asia to net to zero by 2050. So getting Asia net to zero, 2050. That's my current, job, which I'm carrying out as a former Secretary General. In any way, we have to put all our hands on the deck together. That's I think you have some political responsibility. I have a moral responsibility. I think Minister Al-Muhairi, you have a political responsibility. So we have put political, moral responsibility together on the deck. And then I think we can achieve a much, much better world so that we can hand over this planet Earth, only Earth, to our succeeding generation. So I hope that our discussions today will be helpful toward meeting that goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esteban. Thank you, the audience, for joining us online, but also here in the room. Hope to see you at COP27, COP28, and to really show successes on adaptation and mitigation alike. Thank you.